Hey everybody, I'm Bill Calkins with Ball Tech on Demand, and we are back with another installment of In the Break Room, an entire month of short educational sessions intended to help you get prepared for next spring. The temperature's dropping out there, which reminds us that it's fall and it's a critical time to get your operation tuned up for spring crop production. This month, we've selected 9 topics, and hopefully you're taking a little bit of time each Tuesday and Thursday to grab your phone, a laptop, a tablet, and head to the break room with a bite to eat to hear from some Ball Tech on Demand experts. I know for a fact that more than 1,000 of you have viewed the videos because I can see that on my analytics, and I hope that you're finding a lot of fantastic information. We really appreciate it. Today's topic is super important to all growers. It's plant nutrition. And our guest today is also super important to all growers. At least they tell me he is. It's Dr. Todd Cavins, who's a technical services manager with Ball, and he's going to lead us through what to consider when it comes to fertilizer choice and crop nutrition. He's going to cover water quality, pH and EC in your media, plant development stages, and the desired growth you're looking to achieve. So grab a pen and paper and let's get to it. But first, real quick, all the videos and webinars from this October series are collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand for future viewing or to share with the rest of your team. Put the link in the show notes. That's enough out of me. Todd, why don't you go ahead and share your screen and give us a little bit of information on plant nutrition.
All right, Bill, let's do it. Well, hey, as you said, it's fall. Now's the time to start thinking about spring and doing some tune-up. So one of the things that we need to do a little background, a little bit of research and prep on is our water quality and our fertilizer choice. So sometimes trying to make this change right in the middle of the season, it's not a great idea because we need some background information to make the correct change. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about what do we need to know about how we choose a fertilizer and when we choose it. So let's get started. All right, here's a couple of things we're going to take a look at. Water quality, okay? We're going to talk a lot about alkalinity here, but we're also going to look at our substrate pH and EC. Now pH, that's a measure of acidity, and EC, that stands for electrical conductivity. That's an estimate of fertilizer content in the soil. Those are going to be important. We're also going to talk about plant development stage. Where are the plants in their crop development? Do they need a lot of feed or just a little bit? We'll talk about that and what nutrients are important in those different stages. And then we'll talk a little bit and finish up about desired plant growth. We can actually use our fertilizer to help steer how our plants grow. And are they nice and soft and lush, or are they a little bit more toned and compact? We'll take a look at a couple of the things that can impact that with our fertilizer choice. So first, let's talk about water quality. And this is where you need to get a water test performed. You can do it with some in-house test kits, but it's really best at least once a year to send it off to a lab and get a complete analysis. Now, when I ask people about their water quality so I can help them with a fertilizer choice, often the first thing they tell me about is the water pH. And well, that's just not that critical in many instances. If it's above pH of 7, I get a little concerned, but it often directs me to look to someplace else. So for water quality, let's not be too concerned about the pH. We're going to check for things like high micronutrients, high sodium, high boron are two things that really come into play here and can be tricky in several parts of the country. Okay, but the number one thing we're going to look at is alkalinity. Okay, now what is alkalinity? Well, it's kind of like thinking about it as dissolved limestone in your water. It's the buffering capacity. It's the thing that stabilizes your water. Okay, and it's generally measured in calcium carbonate equivalent, which again is limestone. So that's kind of helpful to remember it that way. But it really impacts the type or which fertilizer choice we make, okay? So some fertilizers are acidic and they will help drop our soil pH, and some are basic and they'll help maintain or maybe increase our soil pH. And that alkalinity value in our water is what's critical in helping us determine which one. So let's take a little bit closer look at alkalinity. I'm going to make just some generalizations about different alkalinity, and then I'll get into a little bit more detail about what low, medium, and high alkalinity water values are. But in general, low alkalinity waters, when most folks have those, they tend to have very little calcium and magnesium in their water. And so I often refer to them as pure waters. And that's going to direct our fertilizer choice to often a CalMag type fertilizer. And we'll take a look at a few of those in just a moment. Something we have to look at and why we need a complete water analysis from time to time is sometimes they're high iron or manganese in the water with that low alkalinity water quality. Not always, but it's something we look for. Okay, moderate alkalinity. If you happen to be one of those people that has just the right amount of alkalinity in water, makes it nice and easy to manage. Great. Most of the time, those have a decent amount of calcium, sometimes low magnesium. Sometimes we need to do a supplement here and there, and especially on certain crops, but generally the most desirable range to be in. Then there are those high to very high alkaline waters, and they tend to have a lot of calcium. Sometimes they often have a lot of magnesium. Those always in balance, and we need a certain ratio of calcium to magnesium so we can help you look and adjust that if needed. But these high alkaline waters, we often see high sodium in certain parts of the country as well, especially in arid climates. So here's some generalizations, but let's dig a little bit deeper into each of these categories and start talking about which fertilizer we need for those. So if you have low alkalinity water, okay, and this is and I'm referring to 0 to 100 parts per million calcium carbonate, and you'll often see calcium carbonate equivalent. Sometimes you'll see it marked in bicarbonate. Sometimes you'll see it marked in milliequivalents. Those are all just conversions, but we're talking about things that are on the lower end of alkalinity here. If you have very low alkalinity, and I'm going to say 50 parts per million calcium carbonate and lower, we're probably going to recommend a fertilizer such as 13-2-13, and you see CalMag, calcium and magnesium on there. Remember, I said that these waters often have low calcium and magnesium. So this is a fertilizer that's high nitrate nitrogen, and that'll come into play in just a little bit. That means it's tone growth, and that means it helps maintain or increase the soil pH. So that's what we tend to use for very low alkalinity waters. If you're in the middle part of this range, say you're up around 75 to 100 parts per million, well, then we start to have a little bit more flexibility in what we can use. There are some fertilizers that are neutral fertilizers, such as 17-5-24 or 17-5-17 CalMag. You can see that these fertilizers, there's a little bit difference, and we can help you get into the details on the fertilizer bag, and we'll look at a few differences in a little bit, but the main one there is calcium and magnesium versus no calcium and magnesium. So there are neutral fertilizers that have both, so that can be an important factor to look at. And a lot of times folks like to use one of these neutral fertilizers and then supplement with something like the 13-2-13 or the 15-0-15. Now, 15-0-15 is one of the most basic fertilizers, meaning it could actually elevate your soil pH a fair amount. But notice I didn't recommend that up top because it's not a complete fertilizer. It doesn't have the phosphorus in there that you may need. But nonetheless, here are some of your fertilizer choices and strategies for low alkalinity water. If you have moderate alkalinity, so we're going to say the 1 to 200 parts per million calcium carbonate range. If you're on the lower end of that, that's kind of like the higher end of the previous slide we just looked at. We can use one of these 17% fertilizers. Different brands have different amounts, but they're often 17% for the neutral fertilizers. And again, we have calcium options and non-calcium options depending on what your water test turns out to be. Now, as you start getting on the upper end of this is where we have to start changing our strategy a little bit more, okay? I'm gonna recommend something like a 20-10-20 fertilizer. Now, I should back up just a little bit. The first number I mentioned, the 20, that's the amount of nitrogen. The second number, 10, that's the amount of phosphorus. And the last number, the third number, is potassium, okay? So 20-10-20, that's the relative amount of those macronutrients in there. There's often micronutrients in there, and that's what we want for greenhouse production as a complete formula. But that's what I'm referring to when I refer to those numbers. Okay, so 20-10-20 is a fertilizer that starts on the acidic side, okay? So I mentioned the basic fertilizers maintain or push the pH up. Well, the acidic fertilizers such as 20-10-20, there's also a liquid formula out there, 10-4-3, Nature's Source. These are acidic fertilizers that can push your soil pH down a little bit. And again, what we're doing is we're pushing the pH down with the fertilizer because the alkalinity or the limestone in the water is pushing it up. So we're trying to keep that in balance is our goal. We're trying to balance the alkalinity with the fertilizer response being acidic or basic. And we'll dig into that in just a moment, a little bit further as well. So there's your moderate alkalinity choices. A lot of flexibility in here, and oftentimes you can use more acidic or more basic fertilizers to really help tune your plant growth. If we get into higher alkalinity water, say the 200 to 300 parts per million calcium carbonate range, well, then things start to become a little bit more challenging. If you're on the low end of this, again, you can use something like a 20-10-20 fertilizer or similar. There's lots of fertilizer options out there now. I'm thinking of the Petunia special fertilizers where they're kind of like a 20-10-20 fertilizer, but they often have a special micronutrient or iron chelate in there that helps the plants take it up a little bit more. You can see this picture of the scavola here on your screen, the upper leaf interveinal chlorosis, that's iron deficiency. So those fertilizers that have these specialty iron sources in them can help alleviate some of this problem. Now, you see next there on the slide, I said you could supplement with something like triple 20 fertilizer, okay? This becomes a little risky, and I want to emphasize this is just supplement. Triple 20 fertilizer, 20-20-20, or 2177 acid special fertilizers are generally not good fertilizers for your everyday choice. Again, they can be a supplement from time to time to help push the pH down, but they're really not in the right nutrient values we want. The triple 20, for example, it has way too much phosphorus in there. We just end up wasting phosphorus. Once we get over about 15 parts per million of phosphorus in the soil, it's just a complete waste. The plants aren't using it, so there's no need to apply that. But it can be a strategy just to give us a little bit of drop in pH from time to time as needed in the summer, but not in the winter time. And we'll take a look at what can happen in the winter time a little bit later on in the presentation. Okay, if you're on the upper to middle end of this range, this 200 to 300, say 250 parts per million, that's where I start recommending acid injection, okay? So you put acid into your water and it neutralizes the alkalinity or that limestone in there, okay? Because the limestone's pushing the pH up, the acid is pushing it down. We balance it out just right, and it provides us with some flexibility. So what most folks in this situation do is inject a fair amount of acid into the water that still allows them to use 20-10-20 fertilizer, okay? Now, what else can you do? You can add a fair amount more acid to it and even modify or allow your fertilizer choice an even broader spectrum, and we'll talk about that next. But how do you determine how much fertilizer or how much acid to add? There's this great tool out there called Uptake, and you can see underneath that logo there that it's from the eGrow organization. We'll post that linked for you in the show notes, but this is a great way to take your water alkalinity and some other information from your latest water test, which hopefully should be something fairly recent. You should test it at least once a year and plug those values into the Uptake calculator. Then you can choose what type of acid is most common, for instance, are most easily available or the right choice for you. Let's say 35% sulfuric acid, which is a common battery acid. You can plug those values in and it'll tell you just how much to add depending on how you want to manipulate your water. So it's an excellent tool to help you choose the right amount. And there's also some good tips in there on safety of handling and things like that. Now, what's coming also to that eGrow website, I just got some information that they're updating the FertCalc, which is a tool to help you calculate your different fertilizer rates, get really specific on how much each nutrient is in there, so you can fine tune your fertilizer strategy just a little bit more. That's coming soon, so keep a lookout on the eGrow site for that. Let's talk about really high alkaline water, those that are 300 parts per million and higher. Again, just like the previous slide, acid injection plus an acidic fertilizer such as 20-10-20. But you can also inject even more acid, bring the alkalinity down or neutralize it very, very low. This is what a lot of plug growers do who have high alkaline water. They bring it down even a little bit higher using a tool such as the Uptake. And they're able then to use a CalMag fertilizer or a high nitrate fertilizer that allows them really tone growth. Because what they want to do in the young plant stage is they want to give the plants all the ample nutrients, but they don't want to encourage excessive growth. So extra high acid injection with a high nitrate fertilizer is a great choice to help reduce your PGR use and to create a nice tone plant ready to ship out the door. Now, when you get up into this high range of alkalinity as well, sometimes we get to the point where acid injection is just not enough, or there may be better opportunities. Maybe you have multiple water sources. Maybe you have a well. Maybe you have surface water from a reservoir or pond. You could actually blend those together just to get the right amount of alkalinity in your water and make it nice and stable. And there are some folks, when they get really high alkaline water, say over 400 parts per million, that they often opt for water treatment. The most common water treatment out there is reverse osmosis. That can be expensive. It can be, kind of a headache to deal with the discharge water and things like that. So what most folks do is they take a portion of their water, treat it, and then they blend it back with the raw water to get the optimum amount of alkalinity, the optimum amount of volume, and make it most practical for them. So those are some choices. Okay, I've talked about alkalinity water, different fertilizers, acidic versus basic. So you're asking the question, well, how do I know? Well, let's take a look at the back of a fertilizer bag. I just pulled one off one of the fertilizer suppliers webpage, and this is what I found. I started looking down. I've got all these numbers on here that seems really daunting and confusing. But remember, I was talking about alkalinity, water quality. That's our first choice. And is the fertilizer acidic or basic? You can look at almost all major brands of fertilizer. They have a phrase such as this. And you see this one says potential acidity. So this one has a potential acidity here. It's a nice and low number on there though. Anytime we're under the 150 of alkalinity or basicity, I consider that a neutral fertilizer. So this one is potentially acid, just slightly acidic. And you can see there, I classify this one as a neutral. So how did I do that? Well, that's from experience and that's from learning from other folks. So let me just share with you a table of some fertilizers that are acidic or basic. So you can see that top group. I have 2920. That's the brand of that fertilizer, is similar to a 2010-20, but it's acidic. You can see there with the red A, and its potential acidity is 510 pounds, and that's acidic because it has an A, and it would say acidity on the back. Down at the bottom of that chart, you see some numbers. 13213 is one I mentioned earlier. You see has a blue B for basicity, and you see its number there is 342. Okay, and then we have a group of fertilizers, the 17% nitrogen fertilizers that are in the middle. Both of these that I have here are just slightly acidic. Okay, slightly acidic ends up being neutral for most cases. So that's how you can tell if your fertilizer is acidic or basic. It'll say acidity or basicity on the back, and then you can use information such as this to really classify it a little bit further. Okay, so acidity or basicity, well, how does that work? What's going on in the soil? So I'm going to show you a graphic from a friend of mine, Dr. Brian Krug, that he made several years ago, and it's really what's going on at a chemical level with fertilizer. Okay, so this is, you see a soil solution ammonium uptake. You see the brown piece of soil on your left. You see the water, the blue solution, and there you saw the NH4 plus going in. That's ammonium ion, okay? And that has a plus or a positive charge on it. So when that goes into the plant gives off a positive charge and puts it back into the soil solution. Well, those H pluses are actually acid. That's what that is. And so with the ammonium uptake from that fertilizer, it starts to acidify the soil. Now, just the opposite happens on a basic soil. So nitrate fertilizer from 13-13 has a negative charge. So the plant would give off a negative charge and eventually raises the soil pH. So why is that critical? Well, let's take a look at the pH range, optimum pH range for most crops. Let's say it's 5.8 to 6.2. That gets about 90 to 95% of the crops we grow, and it's a good, safe range. If you look at this chart on your screen, the wider the band, the more available the nutrient is. So you can see, look, manganese is a great example down in the pink shades there towards the bottom. You can see in the 5A to 6.2 range, it's nice and narrow. That's okay. We don't need a whole lot of it in the soil. But if we got very low at the soil pH, say 5 or lower, you can see where the bar really expands in width. And that would become too much available to the plant roots for too much uptake and would become toxic. So that's why we want to keep the soil pH in just the right range. The soil pH, or the acidity, controls the nutrient availability, or what the plant is capable of taking up. Okay, so that's why soil pH is critical. The other thing that we talked about with the soil that I mentioned at the beginning was the soil EC, or electrical conductivity. And again, electrical conductivity is just a measurement we do with the soil EC probe. It gives us an estimate of fertilizer salts that are in the soil. It doesn't tell us specific ones, but we can match that EC to our target crop stage. Okay, so young plants, you can see on the chart here in front of you, don't need a lot of nutrition compared to an actively growing plant. So we would want a lower EC to get started with that crop. Okay, they still need all the nutrients, and they need them in the right ratios. So not withholding feed, but providing at a lower concentration is important. And then when we get to that actively growing stage, say this is that transplant stage to almost finished stage, the nutrient requirement is higher. We can have a higher EC in our soil and then provide the plant all the nutrients we need. Now, for a typical flowering crop, I'm going to use something like a poinsettia here that has a very distinctive flowering stage versus actively growing stage. If it's a plant like that, we can reduce our fertilizer content, concentration, or soil EC at that stage because the plant's no longer putting on vegetative growth. However, if we're growing something like a petunia, like a wave petunia or vegetative petunia that's continually flowering, continually putting on growth, we'll want to maintain that EC up to a very solid, nice, moderate value so that we continue to feed enough that the vegetative growth can continue to be put on. So that's a little bit different strategy depending on how the crop grows. But again, the idea here is to match the EC to the growing stage of the crop. I mentioned earlier also that the type of nitrogen, be it ammoniacal or ammonium versus nitrate nitrogen, can really affect your plant growth. We saw how it affected the soil pH, but it also affects the architecture or the toning of our plant. So if you look on the screen, on your left is the 100% nitrate nitrogen and 0 ammonium. This would be more like feeding like a 13-2-13, which only has a tiny bit of ammonium in it. Notice how toned and compact that plant is, okay? There are some flower buds on there, so it hasn't really delayed flowering. It's a day or two behind, maybe the other one, the one next to it, but all the plant needs are being met. They're just nice and toned. That fertilizer, that plant that's next to it here, that had 25% ammoniacal nitrogen or ammonium added to it, okay? This would be like 20-10-20 fertilizer, one of the most common fertilizers out there. So you can see these two plants were fed at the same amount of total nitrogen. We just switched around which one they were receiving. And when plants receive about 25% ammonium nitrogen, they really start to get lush growth and flourish, and they enhance development quite a bit. So you could see how I could switch from a 13-2-13 to a 20-10-20 and affect how my plants look and grow, and also how it affects my PGR use. So those are our most common that are out on the market, and that's why we want to use those. Remember I said that triple 20 fertilizer and 21-7-7 may not be an ideal choice for normal use, and here's an example why. Now in this particular study, I grew these plants in sand, so there wasn't a lot of microbial interaction that went on. The same thing can actually happen in the wintertime in our greenhouses. When temperatures are cool, it's cloudy, our soil temperatures don't come up, we don't have enough microbial activity to convert the ammoniacal nitrogen into a safe nitrate form, and it builds up and becomes too much. And here you can see all the way on the right, when we had 100% ammonium nitrogen, like you would find in a triple 20 fertilizer, it just became detrimental to growth. So that's why we're not recommending that all the time, in addition to some of the other things like the incorrect nutrient balance and things like that, but not your ideal fertilizer choice. So those are things to keep in mind. Okay, so we talked about a lot today, but let's review that path to the correct fertilizer choice. Test your water regularly, at least once a year. If you've got a brand new well, I would check it several times a year because it will change. For those with you with shallow wells, also rainfall from the season can really affect some of the parameters in there. So test your water regularly. Match your fertilizer to your alkalinity. We talked about those alkalinity values and how they were at the amount of limestone that's in your water. So match that amount of limestone in your water to your fertilizer choice. Okay. And that may take acid injection for some of you. Think about those fertilizer choices and how that type of nitrogen not only affects their soil pH, but it affects the growth of our plants. So we can get more tone growth if we select a high nitrate fertilizer, but that may not be appropriate for alkalinity unless we use acid injection. Always think about some of those other things that can be confounding out there, like micronutrient concentration. Just a quick tidbit, most of these bag fertilizers we have in North America, they're designed to be fed at about 200 parts per million. So if most of us don't feed that high anymore. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we may have plenty of macronutrients, but we might not have enough micronutrients. So think about some micronutrient supplements to ensure your crop is on the right target. All right. I also want to say, let's target your fertilizer to your growth needs of the plant. So we talked about the age of the plant, and as it becomes young to actively growing, how we need more fertilizer, a higher EC content. But also think about the size and the shape and the architecture of the plant. We can use that nitrate to tone it, or we can use a little bit of ammonium, such as in 20-10-20, to get an extra little bit of flush of growth if we need that, if we're a little bit behind. And last, I'll say monitor and maintain your substrate pH and EC. We talked about a lot of chemistry and things like that, but there's some really simple tests out there and inexpensive meters you can do to really keep your crop on target. So with that, that's your path to fertilizer choice.
Excellent, excellent. You packed a lot of information into 30 minutes there, and I'm guessing you could have probably spent hours on this topic, right?
Absolutely. That's one of the things that gets a little tough for somebody like me who spends a lot of time researching this type of information. There's lots of information out there, and it's good to understand it, but we want to try and make sure we make it presentable and applicable to you. So yeah, thanks for dealing with some of the academic side of our business from time to time so we can get you the best info.
Well, I think you did a fantastic job and really, really appreciate it.
Oh, you
So
bet.
before we close, just a reminder that all the videos from this In the Break Room series are collected and posted at growertalks.com/tech-on-demand. You'll find more videos there already. Cover propagation, photoperiod, watering, perennials, impatiens, calibrachoa, with more to come. Actually, next up is our final live webinar. It's on spring preparation, which covers a wide range of topics, and that's scheduled for Thursday, October 29th at noon Eastern Time. So you can register right now at growertalks.com/webinars. We hope that you will join us. So that's it for today. On behalf of Todd, I'm Bill Calkins with Baltech On Demand, wishing you all the best and nothing else. Take care out there.